Hey guys, just figuring out some technical difficulties really quick before we dive into our conversation. Okay.
Still a little off.
Seems your way.
Minor
So
delay.
professional.
Hey
Okay.
guys.
Thank you for joining us. You are watching Up for Debate. This is our weekly discussion about politics in the United States, although we're going a little international today. So if you haven't joined us before, this is our second time going live on Facebook. We used to do the series on Periscope and found last week that we got a lot more interaction with Facebook. So yeah, so if you're joining us, leave comments. We'd love to hear from you and have kind of a discussion as well. I'm Kristen Howerton. I blog at Rage Against the Minivan.
And I'm Paul Martin. I blog at Paulo Sophia.
Paul and I are friends and political junkies, and we come from differing sides of the aisle in terms of politics. I'm a democratic socialist.
I'm a moderate Republican.
And we have been doing this series now really since the election came into full swing.
4 or 5 months.
Yeah. So we wanted to dive into some international stuff tonight and talk a little bit about what's going on globally and how it relates back to American politics. So let's talk a little bit. You were saying, you know, something earlier about the tragedy that happened in Istanbul. I think at this point, I think maybe 40 people. About 40
something
people
around that number.
In the airport?
Yes.
There was a mass shooting.
And it was very planned.
Uh-huh.
And in a certain sense, I mean, we know this. I remember way back in '94 when the Rwandan genocide was taking place. And I remember at the same time, I believe it was January of '94, we had the Northridge earthquake, where I think, God help those families, 50 people died.
Right.
While there were hundreds of thousands being, and you almost couldn't find it on the American.
Right.
So there is a normal sense in which, as Americans, we don't care much about what's happening in the world.
Right.
But one of the things we were talking about was how both Paris and Belgium received so much news, even here in the U.S. And Istanbul, it's pretty hard to find much news about that.
And they're very similar events.
Yeah.
I mean, almost identical events. What's the difference here?
Want to jump into
Let's jump into it.
Well,
What's the difference?
Yeah, one theory, which I happen to agree with, is that, as a matter of fact, ISIS is killing Muslims. Their angst is with anybody who they consider to be an infidel.
Right.
And that could just as easily be a Muslim as it could be a Southern Baptist.
Well, you know what? Actually, I'm going to back up on that a little bit because I actually think you're more likely to be considered an infidel if you're Muslim but not devout or whatever you know their definition of devout is. But I actually think that they are more angry with Muslims who are not complying with their radical version of Islam than Christians.
Yeah, yeah, and that was, I mean, Al-Qaeda they were every bit as militant and every bit as angry with Muslims that were, you know, lukewarm, using some Christian nomenclature.
Right.
And so the war is primarily against other Muslims. But one thought, and I read an article today, is that to the degree that we in the West, to the degree that Americans agree, to the degree that we agree that, yeah, ISIS wants to kill Muslims, all of a sudden it's no longer a war against America.
I agree, but I would take that one step further and say if we admit that ISIS is killing Muslims, it's no longer our war against Muslims umbrella.
Yeah.
Then this forces us to see and acknowledge and say this is not all Muslims, which we know to be true anyway. But you know that Muslims are in harm's way as well.
Right.
This isn't a Muslim versus Christian war, which seems like something some people want to perpetuate.
Seems like tens of millions want to perpetuate,
Well,
including political candidates.
Totally. I mean, it feels like Trump wants to perpetuate the idea that we are in a Muslim versus Christian war, and what Turkey does is illustrate that this is a radical Muslim versus everyone else war, including Muslims.
Yeah, and this has been going on. I mean, the Shiites and Sunnis have been fighting each other for centuries,
Yes.
and so. But again, one of the problems of geography is that we just in America don't understand that history. That Muslims have tensions with Muslims. ISIS is killing Muslims. Al Qaeda was killing Muslims. We want to turn this into this idea, like Trump said. The idea is we need to protect America because we don't know what's going on over there. Yeah, we do.
Right.
It's been happening for a long time.
Absolutely. And someone just commented and said, Turkey is a Muslim country and there's little empathy for Muslim countries. And I think that's absolutely true. And I think, it's funny because I can remember as a child talking to my mom about Rwanda and what was happening there. And my mom saying something to the effect of, well, they've always been killing each other in Africa. Just sort of like, well, these savages over here. And I think that there is that view of Muslims too. Like, we're unable to see that these are families and mothers and fathers and children, and they're the people that this happened to in Turkey are the same as the people in Paris and Belgium. But they're just, we other them.
Yeah, and it's interesting in our so-called debate because we find ourselves agreeing so much to the point of some of my friends, kind of telling me, wait, where do you disagree? And those times will come, but it seems like in this particular election there are some kind of very big, high-level issues, this being one of them, of which Republicans and Democrats are agreeing on. George W. Bush is not going to the convention because he will not support Donald Trump, and so you have this whole...
And this particular issue is one that is making a lot of Republicans go, whoa.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
After 9/11, George W. Bush went to a mosque and he spoke and he said, "This is one of the world's great religions, and it's a religion of peace."
Yes.
And you don't see that on many bumper stickers. You don't see it at many Trump campaigns because to the degree that we can demonize an entire religion, or for that matter, an entire ethnicity, we can play into that latent fear that people have that these people are out to get us.
That makes me think of a question. Like, so we have definitely seen Trump sort of try to make tokens of Black people and make tokens of Mexicans. The Mexicans love me. Ask the gays, they love me. The Black people love me. There's my African American. Has he ever tried to make a token of a Muslim, or is he not even going to go there?
I think he has. I do, for some reason, recall him talking about how, and his comments are usually, there's no one, trust me, believe me, there's no one that loves me as much as the gays. Or there's no one that loves me as much as... I'm not positive on the Muslim issue, but he did this week retract when he went to Scotland to his golf course. He did retract the total ban, and I don't know if you heard that, but he kind of sanded the edges down and said...
In Scotland, not here.
Yeah, in Scotland. Was it Ireland, Scotland? And said that the ban should be against people coming from Muslim countries, something like where there's where there's terrorism, and that's just kind of ridiculous because any country, and many of the Muslim terrorists come out of Europe and the U.S. As we well know from Orlando and San Bernardino.
Amber left a comment and said, "I wish all of our elected officials would be required to travel overseas to that area at some time to see for themselves," and I completely agree.
Absolutely.
I think travel, it's interesting because I know you get some pushback about maybe you're not Republican enough, but I feel that one of the reasons that you have a more global view is that you have traveled a lot and you've lived overseas, and that really informs the way that you think of people.
Totally, absolutely.
Yeah.
And in the abstract, we can use these common nouns like Muslim or Mexican, but go down the street, go to your local mosque, and I keep saying this, you're going to find doctors and accountants and people that own grocery stores raising their kids, teaching them values, playing on the AYSO soccer team. But when you create these common nouns, but Trump knows that plays onto people's fear. It's just easy. It's easier to think of an entire race or an entire religion in a negative context. I had someone today on Facebook say that the goal of Islam is world domination, and if that was the case with millions of Muslims living here in this country, we'd be seeing shootings happening all the time.
Right.
We'd see bombings happening all the time. It's clearly not the case.
Well, I think it would be fair to say the goal of ISIS
Absolutely.
But that's, again, not Muslim. And using those terms synonymously is just a problem that doesn't seem to be going away.
And it doesn't, and yet it seems as though, in my little space that I work in, it seems as though more people are getting more comfortable with the distinction between ISIS and Muslims. And even Trump now speaking from teleprompters, which he would never speak from, but he's even starting to
change his language
a bit, because I just don't think most Americans, and there is that 10%, but I just think most Americans realize just there's no way that an entire religion is out to bomb us.
Right.
I mean, every individual is absurd.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit. I mean, you mentioned Trump in Scotland, and there was a very infamous tweet last week in which he congratulated Scotland for their decision to remove themselves from the European Union, and in fact, Scotland had not made that decision.
Oops.
So one of the things we wanted to talk about was the different candidates and their foreign policy abilities, which I think his are low. But let's talk about Brexit really quick, and this vote where England basically said we want to remove ourselves from the European Union. What are some parallels between what's happening there and our current political climate?
Yeah, it just seems like the two big issues are economics, and you hear this with Trump and trade, and we got to make stuff in America, and we're selling out to China and Mexico and Vietnam, and so one of them is this appeal to economics, make stuff here, nationalism, and I think that's his card. I think if he's going to win the election, he's going to have to convince millions of Democrats and Republicans that on an economic level, he's going to bring back kind of this idea of American jobs. But the second is an emotional appeal to the multiculturalism that's happening all over the world. In our country, like I said in our last stream, that in 2042, whites will be a minority in the United States. It's a multicultural country, and it's becoming more and more racially diverse, and that certainly was the case in England. Since the EU and people from Eastern Europe were able to come over, cross the border, no problem. And in England, people basically said, especially the conservatives said, we're done. We're tired of these immigrants coming and taking our jobs.
Right. Yeah. Do you think that was a real fear or a realistic fear? Were their jobs being taken away? Or did they just not want their country looking more brown?
Well, I mean, that's the great question, and amongst the demographics are remarkable. The older generation, 70 plus, 60 plus, this group overwhelmingly wanted to exit the European Union. They wanted old Imperial Britain back.
Yeah. And
you just look at the I would love to see the comparison demographics here in the U.S.
Right.
Amongst the Make America Great Again folks, because I know that demographic is largely 70 plus, 60 plus, but the younger generation, the millennials, overwhelmingly in England wanted to stay with Europe.
Yeah.
And so, there's a huge parallel.
It's very similar, and I mean, the things that I'm hearing. It seems like a lot of people suspect that this was really a decision to try to keep out immigrants. And, the irony, of course, being that Britain has colonized nearly every, has colonized across the continents and inserted themselves into nearly every country, and yet they want to sort of put the wall up.
Right. Yeah, I mean, for me, these are such nuanced and complex issues.
Yes,
that's why politics is so fascinating.
I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say it's purely racism,
right?
That they made this decision, but I think some xenophobia and nationalism definitely plays a part.
And you are a person that, and we said this I think months ago, you would say, what's wrong with a multicultural America?
I would.
What's the problem?
I would, and I still say that.
And yet, there is a constituency out there, and maybe some of you are watching, that if you're honest with yourself, you don't like that idea. There's this notion that we are Western European.
Right.
We were founded, about the American Indians, but we were founded, and Leave It to Beaver in the 1950s, and just we were this kind of white and largely Protestant nation, and that's changing here. That's certainly changing in England, and there's some people that are really pissed off about it.
Yeah.
And my contention is, and I'm Latin, I'm half Mexican, Spanish, and half Italian, and so I grew up in a home where English was spoken, but there was also Spanish and Italian being spoken all the time. But I'm more like you, even though I am a Republican, where the writing is on the wall. Times are changing.
Yeah.
Britain can exit, but it's
Yeah.
not going to change the ethnic makeup
No.
nor the religious makeup,
Right.
the multiculturalism that's sweeping the West.
Yeah.
And some people don't like it, but I don't think exiting the EU is going to change anything. And I don't think electing Donald Trump as president is going to change anything, because times are changing. Just go to a restaurant and see the selection of food you can order today versus when I was a kid, when it was like chicken and dumplings or the club sandwich.
Yeah.
I mean,
and like to your point, my boys and I are going to dinner later, and the girls are gone, so they're the picky eaters. So the boys and I are like, we can eat whatever we want, and
that's nice.
of course, the things that we want to go and eat are like ethnic foods. Like we want to go try something different. Jeff is like, let's eat Ethiopian food, and
that's great.
I don't know. I mean, I really appreciate that about America. So to me, the whole "Make America Great Again," like, I don't know. I have such fondness for the multiculturalism that we get to participate in here, especially in Southern California.
Yeah.
Well, that's a good segue to. We wanted to talk about how each of the candidates is going to fare in this sort of multicultural climate that we are already living in. As you said, we're not going to dial that back. How do you think? What is going to happen with Trump when he has to lead a country that is multicultural?
Wow, that's a brilliant question. And I mean, I think these candidates have to eventually come toward the center. I just don't see how Trump can't deliver on the promises that he's promising. Let's say for trade, for example, he's not behind the current system where a guy can make widgets and have them manufactured wherever he wants. Trump's going to have to interfere. I just don't see how with Congress Trump is going to make this nation more white or more American or more June and Ward Cleaver. It's water under the bridge, or even with 12 million Mexican undocumented workers.
Yeah.
The world is changing, and I think in the 5 stages of grief, I think to a large extent what you have with Democrats, they're further along the road, and they are much closer to acceptance. Then, generally speaking, Republicans are angry, they're in denial, they're bargaining. If it wasn't for, electing Clinton, it seems like the Republican Party overall, or to a certain large extent, or a constituency within the Republican Party, is still in the stage of denial and anger and bargaining.
I think you're right.
Where Hillary Clinton is saying, hey, multiculturalism, let's bring people together. It's okay if they're black or white or whatever it is, religions, we are one nation founded on a constitution, and it's all good.
Totally.
And Trump's running against a fear of what she's proposing.
So here's a question. I mean, I agree with you that he's not going to actually have policy changes, but I'm a little curious. I don't even know that he really feels that passionately about this. I think he's pandering to the lowest common denominator, which is this xenophobia, nationalism. But I don't even know if that guy is that I think he's going to get in office and be like, thanks, all of you fear-based people. I don't know that this is really a platform he's going to do anything on. I think it's just a way to get himself elected. Yeah,
and some think, and I happen to agree, and I've never said this about another politician. I think with Trump, you legitimately have perhaps a personality disorder. Or I'm convinced there's a true narcissistic, and people love to throw that term around.
As a licensed therapist, I agree.
Yeah, I'm not really sure if he has. I mean, he flip-flops on so many issues, back and forth, and he has no track record. And so it seems to me there's a certain deep-seated egoism in him that he loves the limelight. He has said, he said in the book 30 years ago, bad publicity is better than no publicity at all. He's been living that out for a year.
He likes to kick up dust.
He loves to kick up dust. And so I'm not really sure what a President Trump would look like. I mean, here's a guy that said he's neutral between Israel and the Palestinians. So where does he really land? And I think you're right. If he got elected, it would be fascinating to see where he would be on moral issues and social,
Yeah.
social issues and economic issues.
It's fascinating, but on the topic of foreign policy, it's frightening because he does love to kick up dust, and you can't behave that way. You know, it's just like the kid on the playground that wants to throw sand in everyone's eyes,
Yeah.
and like some of them are bigger than you.
Yeah.
Like, you can't behave that way.
No, and flicking his finger toward our major alliances like NATO. If it
Yeah.
wasn't for NATO, there probably wouldn't be a world anymore. You know, the alliances we have with Germany,
Yeah.
with Holland, with England, with, you know, all of the NATO countries have protected us here in the U.S. And he flicks sand at NATO and says we don't really need NATO, essentially. And so that's where I totally agree with you, because we have Congress, and so if
Yeah.
we're building a wall, he needs Congress. For trade deals, he needs Congress.
Yeah.
But as the president, he's the commander-in-chief of the military.
And he has a microphone, and he has vomit of the mouth. You know, that's the scary thing. And it's like all of the checks and balances at the end of the day are not going to edit the bullshit he says.
Yeah.
And in this, you know, international climate where there are rising tensions, it's really scary.
Yeah, and even Brent Scowcroft, who was the national security advisor to George W. Bush. I mean, this is like a neocon, Republican, tried and true. He endorsed Hillary 2 weeks ago. And he just basically said there is no possible way, even as a conservative Republican who worked for the Bushes, and I think he was in the Reagan administration, there is no possible way I could lend my support to Donald Trump as the commander-in-chief, and he supported Hillary Clinton.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I just think that, you know, policy aside, like you're saying, I mean, this sort of like personality disorder that's being revealed is really frightening to vote into office.
Yeah.
You know, even if you agreed with all of his policies, which I think few do.
Yeah.
It's just, it's a scary proposition.
And I just have to, like, as a Republican, it's so interesting to me just to see how, I mean, some of the contradictions, maybe I'm the only one that stays up at night thinking about them, but for so long he was blasting all these politicians that use teleprompters. Because I speak my mind, and now Trump's using teleprompters.
Yeah.
And so I just wonder, amongst his constituency, he talks about not being politically correct, but now he's being politically correct, like all the other politicians, using teleprompters with speeches written by speechwriters.
Yes.
Like, so he's in this real interesting dilemma where he wants to be Trump on one hand and be this kind of freewheeling, kind of see it as I, you know, call it as I see it type of guy, but also the entire establishment is saying we will only support you if you use the talking points, and he's somewhere in between. And I think that's fascinating.
It is.
Because the magic was this loose cannon.
It is.
And now he's kind of being pigeonholed into something.
He's bridled a little bit.
Yeah.
Not enough, though. All right, well, hit us up with comments. We will post this video to our blogs in the next 24 hours, so if you want to comment and carry the conversation on there. And join us next week. We will be back on Facebook Live discussing the election.
Happy Independence Day.
Yes.